Welcome back to Underreported Stories, where we cover the news that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News fail to report on or don't report on enough. That was the last time you're going to hear that awesome intro. This is the last time you're going to see this awesome logo or see me in this studio. I'm kind of getting a little bit emotional, like goodbye to my first 5 years of political commentary. Now, I'm not saying goodbye forever, of course. If you've been part of the show, you know that the big rebrand comes this Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And damn, am I excited. I am so pumped to share this with you. So as a heads up, I'm not going anywhere, but I am going to stop posting on social media until Tuesday. I'm going to post this, obviously, post a little bit on Friday, but like 1 p.m. on Friday until Tuesday, you're probably not going to hear from me because doing this rebrand has taken weeks. And there's just so many little intricacies and details that it takes to put together this show. Nonetheless, redo all of those things. And I obviously have to like build a whole new studio too. So until then, I will be gone, but I'm going to leave you with a bomb-ass episode for today. Let's start out with a Texas congressman calling for Trump's impeachment already. Literally, we're not even a full month and we're like, 2 weeks into Trump's administration and we're already going for impeachment. And by the way, if you guys are ready for underreported stories, like you just want to get into it, remember you can always use the chapters feature to skip to whatever stories are piquing your interest for today. But this story is pretty wild and relatively underreported for how big an impeachment story would usually be. So yesterday, Representative Al Green of Texas initiated impeachment proceedings against Trump over his plans, and I'm going to say that quote unquote, his plans to take over Gaza. So Al Green said Impeachment 3.0 basically is due to, and I quote, dastardly deeds proposed and dastardly deeds done. I don't know why it gives me like Disney villain vibes the way it was said. Dastardly deeds done. Like, the fuck kind of show is this? Now, yesterday I did a whole video about this Gaza talk and my synopsis of it, but all shrunken down, basically I think that this is a leveraging tactic and only stupid people believe that Trump wants to actually take over Gaza. And this impeachment is kind of showcasing how correct I am, because what dumbass brings up articles of impeachment against Trump when Congress is entirely Republican controlled? Only a dumb person that is trying to create some sort of political stunt, obviously. Now, what I've noticed off the bat is the difference between impeachment 1.0 and 2.0 and now impeachment 3.0 is that this one is barely making headlines. Like I said, it's pretty underreported. It's so obviously going nowhere that I think most people just don't want to waste their breath on it. And except for the handful of seemingly jobless losers outside of USAID offices protesting right now, like no one cares because we all know this is a joke. Most people, I talk about how I go on TikTok and analyze things all the time, but a lot of people every time I'm scrolling are saying like, just shut up. Just shut up about how much you don't like Trump. He's our president now. So either get on board or vote better next time if you don't want. Like, I think a lot of people are really over the resistance. I think people are just kind of done with it. But speaking of jokes, because that impeachment is a joke. But speaking of jokes, I was prepping for the show this morning and there was this viral tweet. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, Lordy. Okay. So this Democrat influencer, her name is Olivia Juliana. She is a larger woman, undeniably. I'm going to pull up a picture of her for those in the viewing audience. Okay, so Olivia Juliana, she looks like this. And for those in the listening audience, well, more the Apple podcast audience, I would encourage you to come view this woman because she is larger, yes. And she claims that she's, quote, actually down 50 pounds because she cannot afford to eat in Trump's economy. So Here's a picture, by the way, for reference. We already know she's kind of bluffing about this because she shared a picture of her weight loss next to these giant bags of cheese puffs back in September. She tweeted, "I've lost 50 pounds since September 1st. Here's a photo of me next to an absurdly tall mountain of cheese puffs," which, yes, I realize is extremely ironic in this context. But when you see a 10-foot tall mountain of cheese puffs, how do you not take a picture? That was her first thing. And then obviously this is the actual tweet that says, "I'm actually down 50 pounds because I can't afford to eat in Trump's economy. Sad." All right, first off, there is no way in hell that this woman lost 50 pounds in 20 days. Obviously, we have the timeline. But even if she did, I mean, well, first thing that came to mind was like, oh, Ozempic. Yo, should have done that years ago. I don't think that's the words. I'm just making shit up because that's what we do here. Anyway, for real, even with Ozempic, she did not lose 50 pounds since January 20th, okay? Like, that's not possible. Which leads me to a much sadder reality for Democrats, which is that she's trolling with this, right? Olivia Juliana is making fun of the average American who voted for Donald Trump because of high inflation and how that inflation has played out in egg prices, milk prices, bread prices, etc. You get the picture. She is mad because people opted to vote for their basic needs instead of self-fulfillment needs being put out by someone like the Kamala campaign, for instance. Now, if you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm putting it up on the screen right now. It is the best way to explain why Trump won, okay? There are psychological needs that come first and foremost for people. These are things like food, water, sleep, security, safety. That is what the Trump campaign ran on. And then some of the more higher echelon items are things like belongingness and love and self-actualization, which sounds like sexualization. Anyway, that is what the Kamala campaign ran on. And I think you have to be a real elitist snob to think that people are going to vote for elite, high-tier needs when their basic needs are not met in this country. So when I saw this tweet, I actually thought about this tweet. To me, this is a great tweet for Republicans because it exemplifies to me that Democrat influencers, who traditionally the influencers are actually a little bit ahead of the curve of the party, the fact that Democrat influencers have not picked up on why they are losing, that tells me that Republicans have a very good shot in the 2026 midterms or in gubernatorial races across the country. And I will caveat that by saying, as long as Republicans don't fuck it up for themselves, which they have a track record of doing that. But anyway, let's get to our docket for today. So Politico got outed yesterday for receiving a ton of federal funding that was spent on subscriptions. I am going to tell you the truth about this situation. Not the right-wing spin, not the left-wing spin, just the facts. I got you. Plus, women at the University of Pennsylvania are suing the NCAA. ICE raids are happening in Aurora, Colorado, and Amazon is lifting its book ban. So, without further ado, let's get into the 5 underreported stories that you need to know. Today's show is brought to you by Based, my merch line, and we've just unveiled our winter line with a new beanie, a hoodie, a shirt, and a tote bag. I'm an independent creator, and one of the best ways, if not the best way, to support this show is by purchasing my merch line that represents your views. Instead of just asking you guys for donations to fund my independent journalism, my business partner and I created a line of merch called Based Apparel. Based basically means the opposite of woke. It means you're based in logic, based in truth, based in facts. You get it. Anyway, head over to basedandlogicapparel.com to check out our latest apparel. My personal favorite right now is our Based two-tone shirt, which I'm wearing right now. And remember, when you buy merch, you are directly supporting this show. And when you get your apparel, please be sure to tag me on Instagram so I can repost it. Yesterday, Politico was accused of receiving $8.2 million in funding from the U.S. Agency of International Development, or the USAID. And all of this kind of started from a tweet from Benny Johnson. So this is the original tweet from Benny. It says, "This is the biggest scandal in news media history. No employee at Politico got paid yesterday. First time ever the company missed a pay period. This is a crisis. Now we learn Politico, a news company, quote unquote, news company, which spent the last 10 years trying to destroy the MAGA movement, has been massively funded by USAID. Trump and Elon deleted their funding. Now Politico will go out of business. The corruption is endless. Good riddance. So obviously, if you read this tweet, your takeaway would be that the federal government gave Politico $8.2 million. And that was not just the federal government writ large, but the federal government specifically from the USAID. And when Trump and Elon cut back on the funding to USAID, all of a sudden Politico didn't have enough money and had to send out emails saying that there was a payroll issue and, they could no longer afford their operation because they are entirely government run. That is what that tweet insinuates. Whether you love this story, hate the story, that is what the tweet insinuates, okay? So as a journalist, I had to go and check it out for myself. And as you can see, Politico LLC, which I can confirm that this is the building that they operate in because I used to work in that same building. They have been awarded $8.2 million from 235 separate transactions. Now, what I found to be a little odd about the screenshot that was used was that it only showed you, if you go back to the Benny Johnson one, it just shows no bars for the money. But if you go to the one I pulled up, all the transactions over time, you see that this has been going on since 2016. And I think, obviously, 2016 was the year that Trump got elected. Now, he technically didn't come into power until 2017, right? So this was likely done at the end of the Obama administration, if not the beginning of the Trump administration. I don't know that to be true. But we know that these subscriptions started in 2016 and have gone up. Now, you'll notice a massive uptick from 1.4 million that was given in 2018 and 2019 to all of a sudden 2.6, 4.3, 6.1, 7.2, $8.4 million last year was awarded to Politico. But again, something that was mentioned in the Benny Johnson tweet was that all of this funding, again, 8.4 million, which 8.2 million is said over here. There's actually, I guess it's upped because this says 8.2 million awarded thus far, but maybe there's a contract for 8.4 million. It's a little unclear. From this, we hear was being funded massively by USAID. Go to this, and it says awarding agencies: Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Interior, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, FDA, Office of the Secretary, departmental offices, Department of State, right? So I did go through and do some digging, and I can confirm that USAID spent $44,000 on Politico subscriptions. So these are subscriptions to Politico's policy analysis, their newsletters behind the scenes. It's really just a subscription to Politico. It funds Politico's journalism, right? Still, I think it is very deceptive to say that 8.2 million came out of nowhere and was funded by USAID entirely. It's not. It's been going on since 2016, which is arguably worse. And the majority of the money was spent by our Department of Health and Human Services, right? Now, I take most issue with this whole funding. But at the same time, I'm just like, I wish people with these massive platforms, because Benny Johnson is 80 bajillion times bigger than I am. And it's really hard to go back and fact check something like this. I just wish people with these platforms would slow down and do a little bit more research before putting out these statements that then they get blown out of proportion. And worst, they give the left reason to attack, right? Because now they're like, oh, well, this massive story is wrong, right? This is a wrong story because Politico wasn't actually given $8.2 million by USAID. It's they're still awarded way more than that, actually. They've been awarded $8.2 million over multiple years, and we've been spending money on a freaking subscription model for Politico for so long. And that's an awful story, but now the left doesn't have to report on that story. They get to report on the fact that someone that went viral with this story got the fact wrong. The other thing I'll add is you don't need to lie or exaggerate about this story. It's already nuts. In fact, The story I just reported to you is arguably more nuts. It just doesn't agree with this very popular USAID spending narrative that's going on right now in conservative circles. But here's where I agree with the conservative narrative, right? It is wild the amount of money that the federal government has spent on Politico. Notably, the fact that the feds dramatically increased that funding in the very year that Hunter Biden's laptop story came out. And you know who called this? Your girl, sitting right here, okay? 9 days ago, I put out a video just on YouTube and Rumble analyzing 2 ex-Politico reporters bashing on their bosses for how they handled the laptop story. And I questioned whether Politico was somehow paid off by the Biden administration in the same way that Amazon and Twitter and Facebook were all forced to suppress this through government intervention. After I read this article, I started to wonder whether the Biden administration was pressuring journalists like it did with Twitter and Facebook to suppress this story. So I am totally in agreement here that it is more than fair to ask whether Politico has motivations to appease certain federal employees to keep a massive contract like this, okay? And by the way, Politico's not the only company that's doing this, all right? They are not the only company, news outlet, allegedly, that's getting paid by the federal government. In their newsletter yesterday, Axios admitted that it received $5,500 last year as part of an FCC subscription. So not just Politico. And interestingly enough, I just feel like I'm a little ahead of the curve on this story, and I just need to pat myself on the back in front of everybody. So I keep a document with all the stories that I'm interested in talking about. And I left for vacation, obviously, this past week. And on February 3rd, was that Monday or was that Sunday? Oh, it was Monday. Okay. But I was traveling. I was still on vacation. I saw this tweet from a guy named Andy No. He's a journalist. And I wanted to talk about it on the show. And it perfectly fits exactly what I was going to talk about, or exactly what the Politico report is. The tweet reads, "Ever wonder how American taxpayers fund far-left journalists who engage in selective writing to target and censor their targets? Here's one way." So there was this tweet from a guy named Jared Holt, who said he's a very left-wing researcher who researches extremism. And he tweeted about a public school pew-pewing in Nashville last month, that it was done by a white supremacist inspired by right-wingers on social media. Now, this guy obviously feels this way because he's worked at a place called Right Wing Watch, so he was looking for those signs. However, what this guy did not disclose to the audience when he said that the shooter was a white supremacist inspired by right-wingers on social media is that the murderer was Black. And he wrote in his manifesto that Mr. Beast, Destiny, who's a far-left streamer, and Hassan Piker were also among those who radicalized him. So a very misleading tweet, of course. Lying by omission, still a problem, right? Now, we fund this. I don't think you guys realize to the extent, I don't think anybody really realizes the extent, I don't even realize to the extent that we are funding this shit journalism. Under Biden's Justice Department and the Department of, I believe that's Homeland Security, Jared Holt and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue was given $4 million in taxpayer funds to research domestic extremism, specifically right-wing extremists, and then, of course, go out and spew out narratives about right-wing extremism to push a narrative instead of to push actual journalism. We are literally funding, $4 million worth of grants, as you can see, to the demise of our horrible journalists. And this needs to stop. That is why when Elon Musk is overtaking the federal government in the eyes of liberals, it is so good. It's exactly what we voted for. Conservatives wanted this. We want to end this pointless amount of money going towards basically the federal government attacking people who don't have a left-wing point of view. Instead, sue us. We want to spend $4 million on helping people have a better life in America. God forbid. Okay, let's get into our next story, which is that former University of Pennsylvania athletes are suing UPenn, Harvard, the NCAA, and the Ivy League Council of Presidents over their belief that those systems discriminated against them for being biological women. The lawsuit argues that Leah Thomas's eligibility to compete in the NCAA women's category violated their Title IX rights. Fox News had the exclusive on this that swimmers Grace Estabrook, Margot Kaczorowski, and Ellen Holmquist. Why can no one ever have an easy to pronounce last name? Never. On the show, I feel like I struggled to say everyone's last name. Anyway, Grace, Margot, and Ellen, we're just going to call them by their first names, are the people that are suing over swimming against or with Leah Thomas. Now, the lawsuit doesn't name Leah Thomas as a defendant. It's really against the NCAA's rules, which allow biological males to compete in the women's category based on their preferred gender identity. And now they are arguing that this is discriminatory. Now, not to make light of this at all, but a lot of what's in these articles is very repetitive of stories we've heard over the year, very tragic stories. I'm not trying to belittle them. I'm just trying to say there's not a ton of new news in this. Other than that, the timing of it it's not lost on me, right? Yesterday, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that protects the integrity of women's sports, and now any university that allows biological men, no matter their perceived gender identity, into women's sports will no longer be eligible for federal funding. So that is why this happened. But the breadth of the lawsuit talks about the problems that these poor women had to go through, from sharing a locker room with Leah Thomas to learning that they weren't allowed to utilize other spaces to hide or to change in the privacy of other women, right? That the coaches told them they would be subjected to punishment of some sorts if they didn't go along with Leah Thomas, etc. These are, again, not new details, but still just as heartbreaking as they were the first time. And my first question was, hopefully it was your first question too, perhaps, wait a second. Does a private university like Harvard get federal funding? So, does this even hurt them? Yes. Okay. Went into the research for you. Most of Harvard's research funds come from the Department of Health and Human Services as well as the NIH. The Department of Health and Human Services alone gave Harvard a whopping $520 million in 2024 alone. So yes, they are going to comply. But I'm always here to be thoughtful, and I'm always here to be honest with you. And my honest opinion is that this could all fall apart very quickly. There will very likely be a lawsuit filed against this executive order that Trump put out yesterday protecting women's sports. And I think that these lawsuits, like the one I just explained from these UPenn swimmers, are likely an uphill battle because of a case called Bostock. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, and I'm not going to pretend to be a legal scholar, but my understanding of the case is that Bostock, which is a Supreme Court decision, it's just like our slang for it, Bostock upheld the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protects against discrimination now based on gender identity. That's what the court ruled. The gender identity, you cannot be discriminated against, specifically in hiring, over discrimination. And while the case in and of itself didn't specifically answer the question of whether gender identity can be protected above the rights of biological women, whether the Civil Rights Act is superseding of Title IX, that's what we're going to see play out in the courts. And ultimately, I wouldn't be shocked if one of these cases, be it the case that hasn't been filed yet, may be filed by the time you're listening to this, but a case filed against Trump's executive order, or be it this UPenn lawsuit, I would not be shocked if one of those cases made it up to the Supreme Court. So the court is going to actually, probably, most likely, be the one to decide and define what discrimination based on gender identity actually is, and how that right pairs up against the competing right of biological women, because that's exactly what's happening, right? It's two competing rights against each other. And obviously, I'm very biased in this case, and I think that the rights of biological women should supersede that, given the population and whatnot. But I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I'm always going to level with you guys about legal cases. There is so much more nuance to legal cases and decisions. And then I should say there's so much more nuance in comparison to the narratives that get crafted around them in the news. And so I do my best to call my lawyer friends, ask them questions about these cases to get you the best information. And I know there's going to be a lot of lawyer people out there saying, Chrissy, but Bostock is an employment case. I understand the precedent set by Bostock now is going to have to come into question when it comes to these competing rights. That's how I've been told it's been explained to me. Anyway, if you have thoughts about it, please drop them in the comments. Let's move on to our next story, which is that Amazon has returned a book debating transgenderism to its bookshelves after a 4-year ban. So this book is called When Harry Became Sally, Answers to Our Transgender Moment. And the book was temporarily banned from Amazon after people ideologically opposed to the author claimed that the book framed all LGBTQ identity as a mental illness, even though the book literally never says that. So at the time, this was a few years ago, the Washington Post put out a hit job on the book, claiming that the book called transgender people mentally ill. And then the author, his name is Ryan Anderson. When Ryan Anderson questioned the Washington Post on, hey, where did I call transgenderism a mental illness in my book? They didn't answer, and they just changed the title of their article and the whole substance of their article after they got called out. And Amazon had kind of already bowed to the crowd, therefore the book was banned. But we did find out this week that the book is back. And Amazon claims that customer feedback and the fact that literally every other retailer never stopped selling the book, that has brought the book back to the shelves. So good news, obviously good news, whether you like the substance of the book or not. I'm not calling for the abolition or the banning of any book, contrary to what the left likes to say about the right. No one wants to ban books. They just don't think federal tax dollars should go towards subsidizing corn books and then putting those in public schools where young kids can see it. That's where people think that we like to ban books. We don't. We just think that certain books are inappropriate for school. Sorry, that's so problematic. It's not. It's literally a select few group of people that believe that that's not problematic. It's definitely problematic. But back to this story, I can't help but think that the tech bros wanting favor from Trump contributed to this result in some way, right? Jeff Bezos and Amazon, they were so hamstrung by the Biden administration and the Biden administration's insane ideological stances that they just rolled right over at even the idea of a threat over a book that the left didn't 100% agree with. But the rationale for this was that this was over hate speech. They have a policy that does not allow hate speech on their platform. Why is Amazon allowing and deciding what is hate speech and what is not hate speech? I've seen some pretty crass shirts on their website. Why do they care so much about one book? And I think the left is the one that they're the ones that probably pressured this. I'd be interested to see if there were emails similar to what we saw with the Biden administration pressuring Twitter and Amazon about COVID-related stuff. But this book, by the way, it's a very well-researched, common sense approach to the subject. I'm looking now. I don't think it's on my bookshelf. I feel like I was at the Heritage Foundation 4 years ago, and the author does work at the Heritage Foundation. I swear I have a copy somewhere. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I don't know. But the synopsis of the book, and I've also met and had lectures from the guy that wrote this book. Very common sense, very kind person. This is not a bombastic book, okay? And I think that's exactly why they targeted this book. They censor books like this because a book that is common sense, very well researched, that is wildly effective in getting people to think for themselves. And let's be honest, governments, no matter their political ideology, they traditionally don't love a well-educated population that thinks critically about their actions. And by the way, actually, as I'm saying that out loud, I'm realizing well-educated, not synonymous with people who critically think about governmental actions, right? As evidenced by the entire Democratic Party. You can be very well educated and not be able to think critically, and you can be you could have 0 degrees and in college, right? You could have barely graduated high school and still be able to critically think. Those two things are not one, I shall say. Anyway, yesterday, guys, I teased that I'm attempting to revamp my newsletter alongside my rebrand, which again, Tuesday, it's coming. And I gave it a shot yesterday. I wrote a whole article on Trump's Gaza announcement and why I found it to be strategically brilliant. And my goal now is to try to get out a think piece for you Monday to Thursday, either reacting to big news of the day or sometimes underreported stories, and then wrap up all of the underreported stories of the week in a Friday newsletter. And I'll also have like cute updates, like family updates with me and my husband, maybe some information about our move, Harper, my dog, I'll make that one a little bit more personal on Fridays. But of course, Monday to Thursday, we're really going to focus on newsletters, think pieces, stuff like that. So if you like to read or if any of this piques your interest, please be sure to subscribe to that. It's linked below in the description. But let's get into our next story, which is that ICE officers have finally hit up those apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. So in case you're not familiar with this story, a Venezuelan prison gang called Tren de Aragua, they had taken over multiple apartment complexes across Aurora, Colorado, which is a city near Denver. I believe it's a separate city, but I think it's like a whole city. Like it's a big area. And these migrant gangs had come in and held tenants at firearm, overtaking these buildings. I've actually talked to the manager of one of these buildings. It's called The Edge at Lowry or something like that. I talked to the guy, and it's all true. It's actually worse than how the media is reporting it. These managers, not only were they really held at gunpoint by this organization, by these gangs, the manager or the why am I blanking on the word? Like the custodians, yes. The custodial staff, all of them, they were also held at gunpoint. And then the top echelon of management really did nothing to help them out with the gang problem. But now, under the Trump administration, ICE's Denver branch said officers targeted at least 100 gang members yesterday. Now, here's the thing. They didn't tell us how many they got in the raid, how many illegal immigrants or how many members of Tren de Aragua. My first impression, obviously, is that they didn't get that many because they would be bragging if the number was significant. I'm also, as Ariana Grande or Cynthia Erivo would say, I'm holding space for the idea that maybe they just don't know the numbers yet. But, to no one's shock, I'd be really happy to be proven wrong that they got a lot of people. Something about it seems fishy to me, and I'm going to call out when I see something fishy, okay? Anyway, the DEA was also part of this raid, which is great. They reportedly captured cash, weapons, guns, and this is really interesting. A drug that is notoriously trafficked through Tren de Aragua called Tusi, which it kind of translates to pink cocaine, which I had no idea about. And I was thinking, holy crap, we didn't even know that was a problem yet. I had not heard about Tusi. I was not familiar with this. And then I just started going down a rabbit hole. It was like, oh my gosh, we'd probably be in a massive drug crisis or even a bigger drug crisis if Kamala had been elected, where these drug cartels from Venezuela were coming in and selling pink cocaine to college kids, and we'd just be witnessing yet another extension of the fentanyl crisis. And obviously this is just my prediction / my brain going spiraling downhill or whatnot. But that is where my mind initially went. But thankfully, these gangbangers are going back to Venezuela, okay? Remember that Nicolas Maduro, he's the president of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro and his regime in Venezuela have finally agreed to take back these migrants, even the violent criminals. They're all going home. And I should add, I told you guys I've done a video on my time asking Tom Homan questions. He's our border czar. And back in October, we were talking. He gave us a very frank conversation, a bunch of creators and influencers and whatnot. And he said to us that the biggest problem right now is that Venezuela refuses to take these migrants back, no matter what they try. Well, I don't know whatever they did, but it worked. All I know is that in October, that seemed virtually impossible. And then within the first 2 weeks of the Trump administration, it was done, which is pretty insane, right? Right. All right. Well, let's get into our fifth and final story, which also has to do with the number 5. So 5 Virginia school districts were issued a formal complaint from the Department of Education over their bathroom policies that allow boys to utilize bathrooms marked for girls. Great reporting over at the Federalist brought this story to us, saying that the U.S. Department of Education has filed, not lawsuits, but a formal complaint against 5 of what they dub the most corrupt school districts in Virginia. So to get a good grip on this, you have to understand that the Biden administration tried to rewrite Title IX to basically protect the civil rights of gender-identifying individuals, right? People with different gender identities. Title IX in and of itself is a binary of the genders, right? It believes there's male, there's female. So Biden was rewriting that. Trump has since come in and reinstated the Title IX regulations from before Biden, right? So now schools that have gone by the Biden Title IX rewrite have to roll back those policies. So the school districts that are doing that include Loudoun and Fairfax County. These are notorious left-wing school districts. I actually got my start in reporting on these school districts. Arlington County School District, as well as Prince William counties and the city of Alexandria. The Education Department is planning on investigating them for violating the Trump administration's orders and actions on gender identity and allowing men, not even men, it's mostly the boys, in girls' locker rooms and in girls' spaces. Okay, I feel like I'm being annoying with how nuanced I am today, but I just have to be the honest broker in the group. So feel free to disagree with me, but here's where I see it. A lot of these school districts don't want to change their policy. They're far left extremists that have embedded themselves in a bunch of public schools, and they have horrible ideologies they won't want anywhere near a kid, right? They also believe that the executive orders are going to get challenged in the courts, which I don't disagree with them on, right? These orders about gender have already been sued, right, by families and doctors in the case of the gender transition, I wouldn't call it a ban, but the taking away of federal funding from hospitals, right? I'm assuming like I indicated before, that the executive order that was signed yesterday also going to get sued. So these school districts, in their mind, they're like, okay, well, these are already going to get challenged in the courts. And once these executive orders gets challenged in the court, the school district doesn't have to abide by the new executive orders. They just have to stick with Biden's rewrite of Title IX. So this really goes back to the story about suing the NCAA from earlier in this show, right? Thanks to Bostock, thanks to Title IX rewrites from Joe Biden, we don't know how a lot of these gender issues are going to play out in the courts. And when we have 2 competing groups that cannot be discriminated against, it's going to be very difficult to know where this is going. So I literally am maybe one of the top 5 people in this nation that hates these wild left school districts the most. Like, I hate them. I'm literally in the chat of people that hate these public school districts. A whole Twitter chat, okay? And at the same time, I still have enough grace and logic in my head to understand that these school districts are going to have to reverse their policy today to get this education thing to go away, to reverse it back in 2 days when the schools, and when everything inevitably gets sued by the ACLU or something, right? So when they are hearing whispers about lawsuits in the coming days, it makes sense to me why they're not immediately reversing this, right? Do I agree with it? Absolutely not. I wish they would just not allow it, right? But I also am old enough and mature enough to understand why they're making the decisions that they're making. But anyway, I feel like I'm just the bad guy today, being I understand the nuance. Oh, people are going to hate me. I'm going to be so annoying. Anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Yesterday, I put out a video on my thoughts about Mara Gaza, as I like to call it, aka the whole Trump threatening to take over Gaza saga. Very funny. So if you're in the viewing audience, please go check that video out. I would really appreciate it. Plus, these are only 2 videos left before I'm gone until Tuesday. So enjoy, right? And honestly, I had such a fun time putting the video together, so just really appreciate it if you watched it. But if you are in the listening audience, once the show wraps up, it's going to go straight into that episode. It's an additional 9 minutes. I think you're really going to enjoy it, so I just tagged it on at the end. Anyway, if you are a real one and you made it to the end of today's show, will you drop the newspaper emoji as an homage to the losers over at Politico? Thanks, friends. I'll see you when the rebrand drops. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment about how beautiful, stunning, and funny I am. And if you want more content based in logic, be sure to click over here for more videos and clips of my show. If you have the means to financially support the show, consider purchasing from my merch line, Based Apparel, linked right below. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye, friends.